Okay, let's bring the music down. Are you ready? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Markowsky. Welcome to my studio. Today we are going to be making another painting by another one of my very favorite artists. This artist, I think, is one of the most important artists in Canadian history for various different reasons that we're about to get into. She's not too well known today, but at various times in her life, she's had huge impacts on the course of Canadian art history. And then, you never really know how those ripples are rippling out into other places in the world. So, we are going to look at the art of Mabel May today, or Henrietta Mabel May, or H. Mabel May, depending on the source that you look at. And this is the painting that we're going to be recreating together live. So we're going to make this painting over the next few hours today. If you've never seen me before, welcome. If you're watching this live, then you're going to see me make this painting. You're going to see the decisions that I make along the way, as well as lots of stories, some fascinating and some completely uninteresting. But you're going to see possibly mistakes that I make and how I fix the mistakes. If you're watching this video after it was recorded, well, maybe you've already done this. You can go right to the very end. You can take a look at the painting that I create, and you can decide for yourself. Did I do a good job or not? Is this something you want to invest some time into painting this painting? I think this is a fantastic painting. This painting belongs to the collection of the National Gallery of Canada, and it is one of their, it's usually on display there. It's, I think, a fantastic painting. Probably some people would mistake it for a Group of Seven painting, and you wouldn't be too far off, because she knew the members of the Group of Seven, painted alongside A.Y. Jackson, who was really the engine behind the Group of Seven. And for those of you that maybe aren't aware, the Group of Seven is by far the most important group of artists, the art movement in Canadian art history. But the Group of Seven only lasted for, depending on, it's sort of officially for about 5 to 10 years or so. I can't remember the exact dates, but around 1919 or 1920 to 1930 or something around there. Subsequently, and it kind of overlapped with this other group called the Beaver Hall group, and the Beaver Hall group was mostly a Montreal-based group of artists, and it was founded by A.Y. Jackson, who I said was also a member of the Group of Seven. A.Y. Jackson was from Montreal, as well as our artist today, Henrietta Mabel May, and she was one of the founding members of the Beaver Hall group. And one of the interesting things about the Beaver Hall group is that they included women in the group, which the Group of Seven did not. And it was a little bit of a larger group, obviously much more inclusive, and it wasn't really as landscape focused as the Group of Seven was. And yeah, see in the chat there, Deborah says she looks like she paints like Lauren Harris, who is probably the most famous member of the Group of Seven. Steve Martin, the comedian, his favorite artist is Lauren Harris, and he's probably, I think he has the largest private collection of Lauren Harris paintings. But yes, you're right, definitely has got a very Lauren Harris quality of in the landscape, in the simplification of things here. And then after the Beaver Hall art group sort of ran its course, she herself founded the Canadian Group of Painters, which was a national art group and movement, and that lived on from, let's say, the 30s till the 60s. I can't, somewhere around 1950s. I'm sure we'll look here. In fact, let's just do this right here. I'm going to let you know that, actually, even before we jump into her biography, what I want to let you know is there's an outline, a tracing of today's painting, which you can download from this Dropbox folder that's free, and it's available to anyone who's got a computer. If you're watching me right now, you should be able to download this file onto your computer and then print it out. And then I'm going to show you momentarily how you transfer it onto a canvas. So if you find this Dropbox link, you'll see all the other artists in here that we can that we've already made paintings of. So some of them are hugely famous around the world, like Leonardo da Vinci or Salvador Dali. Some of them are a little bit more obscure for a lot of people, but are heroic, towering figures for smaller groups of people. So obviously Vincent van Gogh, we did a whole week of Vincent just last week. So here we are, Henrietta Mabel May. You click in here, you're going to see 3 files, and there's going to be the original painting of hers here, and then my outline that I did on the iPad Pro using the Procreate app. Great app, by the way, if you're thinking of drawing on your tablet. I don't know if it's made for other tablets besides the iPad, but anyway, there's 2 versions. If there's a PDF and a JPEG, they're identical, whatever's easier for you to print out. So let's, before I just go too much further, I just also want to let you know that there is a private Facebook group just for people who are painting along with me here. And if you're watching right now and you don't belong to the group, why not, right? Because what's so cool is you can upload your version of today's painting or any of the other 40 or so paintings that we've done thus far. And next weekend, not this weekend, but the weekend after, I do a free feedback session where I take a look at your artwork, the versions of the paintings that we've made in class, as well as the paintings that you're working on your own time outside of class. And even if you don't upload your painting, you don't belong to the Facebook group, no pressure either way. But I think it is interesting to tune in and watch some of the feedback that I give on other artists, because it's usually the same sort of issues that people are having in some form or another. So I don't know, I find that really meaningful for me personally to be able to see all of the incredible work that you guys are doing, because right now I'm just here talking to this camera, and then it's so cool to see the conversation coming back the other way. Okay, so let's just really quickly here, as I said, Mabel May from Montreal, Quebec, 1877 to 1971, died at age 94, so another artist who lived a long and very productive life. As I said, hugely influential. So when you think about how long she lived and the various different artists that she was in close contact with, it's really remarkable. Like she's almost like one of the, like you hear that Kevin Bacon, 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, the actor, and how almost everybody on Earth can sort of trace their connection to Kevin Bacon. I would argue Mabel May would be one of those figures in Canadian art that you could almost every single major Canadian artist has come in contact with her at one point or another. Let me see. What are some really important things? I found this interesting. A critic referred to her as the Emily Carr of Montreal. And if you don't know who Emily Carr is the most important artist in the history of the west coast of Canada, of European descent. Obviously, there's lots of incredible Indigenous artists in this area who've been here for thousands and thousands of years before there were any white settlers here. But in terms of artist painting in the Western tradition, Emily Carr is a towering figure. In fact, I teach at a university, an art school here in Vancouver called Emily Carr University of Art. So people have referred to Mabel May as the Emily Carr of Montreal because of her importance to the art community in Montreal, and just as in not even just Montreal, but throughout the entire nation. But also stylistically, I think you're going to see a few similarities between these two fantastic artists. Now, they also met again, so it's not like there's just this two random connection. They met, I think, in 1927 when a group of artists went out west and met some of the Western artists out there. I think partly, probably in her mind, thinking, I want to make a national movement of artists, and therefore the Canadian group of painters was born. Let me see, what else can we just really quickly say? It's also interesting that she learned her craft from some of the most important artists in Canadian history, and some of her great teachers here. Particularly, I want to point out James Wilson Morris, who is really one of probably the most important artist of around the turn of the century. So he's often grouped in with the Impressionists or post-Impressionist painters, and Mabel May's art looks a lot like, in fact, let's just take a quick detour here. We are going to make a painting by J.W. Morris sometime in the future. I think in the new year we'll do this. But for many people, he is the most important Canadian artist of all time, and she learned to paint from him. Is there... I can't remember. This might be the painting we're going to be making. I've got everything planned out so far in advance. But you'll see, like, this kind of style, which this is 1908, 1909. So this is a good 10, 15 years before any of the Group of Seven really reached their stride at all. The Group of Seven really began around another 10 years from now. Well, the movement doesn't form until 10 years from now. But let's anyway, that's a different artist that we'll talk about in the future. Another thing she's particularly notable for is for painting images of women who are working in munitions factories for the war effort during World War I. And many of those paintings are really important documents in Canadian history, not just art history, but Canadian history, documenting the role that women played while most of the able-bodied men were overseas. Women weren't allowed to fight, but somebody had to build all those tanks and planes and bombs and guns and all that kind of stuff. So, that, I think I'm not sure where in fact, this painting, women making shells. I mean, this is a beautiful painting. And you can see the influence of J.W. Morris here in this particular artwork, in kind of the grays and the browns and the sort of impressionist background here. But it gives you an idea. Also, it seems like a kind of a smoky, dank, hot, humid environment for all these people to be working in there. Anyway, let me see. As I said, she painted alongside A.Y. Jackson. And then I guess lastly, another major contribution she made to Canadian art history is that she worked at the National Gallery of Canada, which already owned a number of her paintings, including, as I said, today's painting. She began working there for about 13 years, or 12 years, sorry, running the education programs there. So if you were a child living in the Ottawa region about 75 years ago, you may have gone on a tour around the National Gallery with one of the greatest artists in Canadian history. So anyway, let's get right to today's painting. I'm going to show you how to transfer this image onto the canvas really quickly. I've already done that, so I'm just going to cue it up and bring it onto the screen. I'll talk over top of it while it's playing here. And so basically, the way that I do this is you print it out onto your photocopy paper or heavier cardstock. You see I'm using a 9x12 sized canvas. The actual printout is 8.5x11, so there's always a little bit of extra room on the sides that I just enlarge a little bit as I'm painting. With this painting, you know, we have a fairly strong horizon line, so it might be worth taking an extra second to grab a ruler and just to make sure that the painting is about as straight as you can get it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if it's really crooked, it's going to drive you absolutely nuts. Or at least it would drive me nuts if I was sitting in your living room looking at this painting on the wall and the horizon line was way off, right? So just take an extra second, grab your ruler, and see if you can get it as straight as possible before you push that tape down on the top of the page there. Okay, so it looks like I'm fiddling around here trying to get it right. Okay. And then I'm going to grab one of these sheets of carbon paper. Carbon paper you can get at any art supply store. You should be able to anyway. Any good art supply store should have it, although carbon paper is definitely a tool that fewer and fewer artists use these days. I actually got this at our local dollar store here in Vancouver. And then you just put that under there. You can also use graphite paper. This is two-sided carbon paper. One side is more than enough, and then I just trace over all these lines, right? And then I'm going to make a line with the ruler all the way across, and let's just go to the moment of truth. You can see I also didn't do every single line here. I did sort of the main shapes, because we're probably just going to paint over most of that anyway. And be sure to save your carbon paper as well, because once you don't have to throw it out after you use it just that one time. You can use it many, many times over. So let's so this is your result. You've got a canvas now with some lines on it. You've got your outline, which I save. I give to our daughter to play with. She often just chews it and but I'm hoping it's all of these images are seeping into her mind somewhere. I just thought I would mention a few. These are books that I got to return to the library later tonight, perhaps, that I've been reading. This is a biography by Matthew McConaughey that a bunch of my students at Emily Carr, you know, I teach a lot of teenagers, and they think he's a really cute guy. So I got recommended this book by them. It's a pretty good book. It's a biography. He's a well-known actor, but it's got some pretty good advice and some things about his life that I was not aware of. It's not really like a Hollywood kind of tell-all kind of thing. It's more kind of, it's a little bit like a life lessons kind of thing. And then I just also want to share this really quickly, because I think this applies more directly to what we're doing in these classes, is this book, The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. If I could just sort of give the one-sentence overview of what this book is all about, it's that challenging yourself, getting outside of your comfort zone is ultimately what creates a more meaningful life. And what we're doing right now is we're making paintings. You don't have to do this. You don't have to make this painting. You could be doing something else. You could be watching. There's lots of stuff on television you could be doing. But challenging yourself to paint something, learning from one of the great masters, right? You know, the paintings that I make, that you make, the painting we're going to make today, where you cross our fingers that it's going to turn out and it's going to be really fantastic, but it's also possible that it might not come out as we want it to. But that doesn't mean that it's a wasted time. We are learning things, we're getting better, and just the fact that you're challenging yourself, getting outside of that comfort zone, is super, super important. Anyway, let's get into the painting. I'll probably blabber on about that a few times throughout the episode, so now I'm just going to take out my art supplies. Those of you that are watching, who've been watching me for a long time, kind of know this is old hat routine, but it is interesting. There's been a few conversations on the Facebook page over the past couple of days about the colors that I use, and people having some difficulty getting the same mixing the same colors that I am. And really it comes down to using different paint than I recommend. And and not by people I think both by accident, and also if you're new to painting and to color, and to really learning the differences between color, and this took me 20 years to learn. So what I'm trying to do is trying to short circuit that learning process for the rest of you. Is everything just sort of looks the same when you go to the art supply store, and every art supply or every paint company sells dozens and dozens of tubes of paint, and it's like, where do I start? I did do an episode almost a year ago, or probably almost exactly a year ago today, where and it's linked down below. I think it's called Acrylic Paint Buyer's Guide or something like that, and I talk about the different paints that I recommend you getting, and I show all the different major brands of acrylic paint and the 6 colors that I strongly recommend that you use. Now, sometimes what happens is people will be like, well, I couldn't find that tube of paint, or they had these really big tubes of paint and they were on sale, so I didn't get the exact right color, but I got a great deal on another tube of paint, and then I can't figure out why I'm not able to get the kind of color that you're getting. And I'm not saying that this is what people were saying on the Facebook. I'm just my own imagination projecting. But the colors that I suggest you get are colors that I have arrived at after literally decades of teaching people how to paint and trying to find a system that works for about as many different paintings as humanly possible. Like, the way that I've been just sort of, I'm working now, sort of turning all these episodes into a book, and I just call it the universal method. The universal method of painting, or the Markowsky method, or the Markowsky universal method. And because these colors that I've selected allow us to get the broadest range of possibilities. There's definitely some colors that you're going to be able to get pretty close to, but won't be able to get exactly. And I'm sure some people have seen that in some of the episodes. But 97% of the colors that you can get in the art supply store, we can mix with these 6 colors. And I'll show you them in a second here. Also, while I was blabbing on, you're like, okay, that's great, but what is... he's talking about something that's totally different than what he's doing. What I just did is I just took some of my warm yellow and I put a little bit of water in that. That's the only water I ever put in my acrylic paint. A big mistake is people always putting way too much, or putting any water really in your acrylic paint while you're painting. You should be able to do this without water at all. But I just put some water in there. It's going to speed up the drying process and thin it down a little bit so it's not quite so bright. I use this yellow because it gives the painting, even though we're going to cover all of this with other colors, it still is going to optically mix. You don't even really consciously see it, but your brain sees it. Your eyes are seeing it and processing it, and it gives everything this warm glow. So that's another part of my method, I guess you could say. You don't have to do this. I would strongly recommend, rather than just painting on the white surface, you put some color down. Traditionally, most artists would put down like a earthy red or a reddish brown, and also have it a little bit diluted so it's not just glowing red. But I think the yellow is a kind of a nice compromise. It's also just very simple. Right out of the tube, and then we are off and running. So I'm going to blow dry this really quickly, just since it's still quite wet. Although if I... well, let's just see. Actually, while that's drying, because it's really hot in here, I'm going to put the paint on my palette, and we'll also just talk a little bit about these colors just for a second. So I'm going to use this warm yellow. All of these, the exact tubes of paint are listed in the description below if you want to buy them. There's links to an Amazon page or you can order them directly. So, and you don't have to buy them off of Amazon, but at least you'll know which colors I'm using, so that if you, because quite frankly, sometimes they're cheaper on Amazon and sometimes they're $20 more than they are elsewhere. So, you know, what I usually do is I just have things, you know, put the price, load up your Amazon page, whatever, when you're in the art supply store, and just take a look. Maybe you've got a cheaper source somewhere else. So what you probably noticed is I got 6 colors here, including this red. I got 2 reds, 2 yellows, and 2 blues. And I got warm reds and warm, like a warm red, warm blue, and a warm yellow, and a cool yellow, a cool blue, and a cool red, right? And it's the combination, understanding how these colors work when we mix them together is what I think makes the whole painting process so much less intimidating, right? Because I know how difficult it can be when you're just getting started as an artist and you go to the art supply store, and there's lots of other videos here on YouTube where people say, oh, what you need is a Viridian green and a burnt umber and a burnt sienna, and you're like 12 things, but that's for landscapes. If you want to do portraits, you're going to, and it's like, okay, so now I got to get 18, and that adds up to $400 of like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. I thought this was just going to be a fun hobby. So this is intended to be as simple as possible, but this is episode 110, and I think you've probably seen, or painting 110, so over that course of time, we've made the Mona Lisa and many of the most famous paintings in history. Anyway, take it or leave it. That's what we're doing. I assume if you're watching right now, you're still interested. So here's this painting. It's almost dry. I'm going to blow dry it for just about 5 seconds. I'll mute the microphone so it doesn't blow out your eardrums, and we'll pick up where we left. Okay, so let's take a look at today's painting and just sort of think about how we're going to do it. What are the steps that are involved? What order are we going to make the artwork? So this painting, actually, let's just, before I sort of just, I'll talk about the history of the painting, where it was made and all that stuff as we're painting it. Let's just do a purely formal investigation. We're going to like just zoom in on it and see if we could just sort of decode a little bit about how it might have been made. Now, when I zoom in here, I see, you know, underneath this painting, I'm trying to see if I see any clues as to what was under all of this. Now, when I'm seeing this kind of little bit of a pink in here, even in and around here. I don't know if that was underneath everything or not. It's a little bit hard to decide, but I think there's this kind of you see these colors. That's what I think is actually the true color that's under here, which is not too different than what we have. Obviously, this is like a bright, warm orange, almost a yellowy orange, right? She was probably painting a bit more of a brownish color, but I think combination with the other colors over top of it makes it look maybe a little bit more yellow. So I think we're probably on the right track. You can also see there's what appears to be some yellow in here, but I think she painted that over top of some of that, as well as down here. But let's see, anything else we can discern here? Typically what I do is I paint the background first and then work my way to the foreground. And then when I get to the foreground, I go all the way back to the background. Or let's do it this way. I start in the background, paint all this stuff, And then I work my way up to the foreground, and then I go back to the background, finish it off, and then come back and then finish on the foreground, right? So that, because usually it's desirable to if you paint the foreground stuff last, then it's possible that some of those brush strokes will be over top of the background and kind of hide parts of the background. And that's useful for a few reasons. One is you can kind of clean up any mess you make. This is already dripping on me here. You can clean up the mess you make if you do make a mess. And it's also, you know, just practically speaking, it's a great way of ensuring that things that if you paint something over top of something, the thing that's been painted over top of looks like it's in behind the thing that's on top of it. If that makes any sense. So it's a great way of immediately creating a sense of depth and space in your artwork. Okay, so let's mix our first color here. So I'm gonna mix some cool blues because we want our cold colors to be in the background. So we're going to mix these, it's a little bit of a grayish cold blue. And you can see there is a bit of a blue, like a warm blue in some of this. A little bit of ultramarine blue, I think. But definitely more warmer blues in the mountains that are in front of the sky. And then as we get into the foreground, we have this very warm brown, right? So we want to use our cold colors in the background and warm colors in the foreground. And I see this all the time on YouTube, that people will say, okay, so you got to put the cool colors, and cool colors are blue, so blue goes in the background, and red is a warm color, so you put the red in the foreground. And that is a complete misunderstanding of what warm and cool colors do, right? That's why we have a cool blue and a warm blue, because we don't just have to put the blue in the background and the red in the foreground. We can put red, the cool red, in the background as well, right? So I feel like every time I do this, I have to kind of help dispel these misconceptions that I don't know, these myths that just get constantly regurgitated all the time, and then people take those things as gospel, incorporate them, and then they pass that on, and so we have this, like, these lies that are spreading outwards that is, as a teacher of art, is just like makes my ears bleed. But anyway, so let's we're gonna need a little bit of white on this palette as well. I don't think we're gonna need any black today. And even if we did use black, we would use it at the very, very end. I'm just looking. I don't think we're going to need black, because we can make a dark color using the colors we have right here. So let's go to a smaller brush. And I'm going to take my cool blue. This brush is a little crunchy. I'm going to get some cool blue on here. And then I'm going to take a good helping of the white. And now that color is like really intense. And you're like, well, that's a beautiful blue, but it doesn't look like anything in the image over here on the left, right? So, because what we have is a cool blue that's really, really intense, really bright, intense, saturated color. We've added some white into it, which desaturates it and tints it down. But it's still too electric of a color, especially in our background. So I'm going to take a little bit of warm red, because if we mix these, it's going to go a bit gray. So if we just mix that in here, that warm red, since it's on the other side of the color wheel, is killing off the intensity of that really, really bright blue, right? Now, as I said, there is a bit of warm blue in that sky, but we're going to do that in a subsequent layer. So I think we're going to get even more white in here. So what I'm going to be doing as we start painting is I'm going to use this color probably for like areas like in here. I can use this, and then as I go into here, I'll add more and more white to it, and then we'll have like mostly white with a little bit of this color. Then we're gonna move. Then we'll go and paint the hills, and we'll move all this, and then when we come back to here later on, we're gonna put some warm blue back over top of this, right? But we want to ground it with a little bit of cool blue so that it pushes those clouds and sky backwards a bit, okay? So let's just take this color, and your probably immediate reaction is like, well, he's got the color all wrong. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Again, just if you doubt me, go right to the end. Just go have make yourself a sandwich. Go watch some Netflix or something, and then come back, join me in a few hours, and then you tell me if you think it turned out well or not, right? So I'm going to paint this cool blue fairly intensely here, and you can see I'm going over some of the pencil lines, so we're going to lose a little bit of detail. Let's add just a tiny bit of white into here. But slowly, we'll, as long as we have the main shapes here, we'll be able to figure out how all of this looks like as we progress. So, and you can see I'm also using a big brush, right? I think sometimes people make the mistake of going right to the smallest brush right at the beginning because they want to. There's people out there who teach, a lot of them on YouTube, who the idea is like you would get this perfect before you move on to this, and then you get that perfect, and it's almost like a computer printout. Everything perfect, everything perfect, everything. By the time you get down to the bottom, the painting is done. That is not the way that I make a painting. There's many different ways to make a painting. I'm not suggesting that I have the only way that works, but I do think that you're going to get, well, you're going to get good results this way. Whether they're necessarily better, I don't know. I don't want to put anybody else's process down, but okay. I'm not sure. I'm just gonna. All of this stuff too can be fixed, adjusted ad infinitum. So don't worry about making it absolutely perfect right now. Again, this is all just cool blue, some white, and a little bit of warm red. Very small amount of warm red in here. And you can see that she's definitely, this color is definitely what she was using. So she's using this cool blue that seems to almost kind of shine through everything. So that's telling us that we're on track here. You could paint these areas warm blue right now. My fear is that they would just be too warm and therefore just sit right on the top layer of the canvas, and it might confuse the eye of the viewer who starts to think like, okay, wait a second, those clouds are like closer to me than anything else, which is possible. Clouds don't have to be in the farthest part of the background. They can be quite close or right overhead of us, right? But they're still, clouds are usually probably further away than even the most furthest part of the landscape, right? If you were to take a tape measure and try to measure how far away those clouds are. So a little bit of warm red is mixing into my paint. I don't even, I'm not going to bother fixing that. That's just where it wasn't dry. Sometimes there's wet paint still on the edges, so again, this, I would still just consider this is just our under layer. Okay. All right, nice. Again, big brush that I'm painting with here. Okay. I think that's pretty good. It also looks like she's used this same color. I'm just going to put this right here on some of this mountains here while we've got our paintbrush loaded up with color. We're going to add white over top of all of this. Remember, this is what we're painting right now is called the underpainting. That's the paint that goes under the finished painting, right? So, you know, it's like I like using metaphors and things like what is it? It's like your underwear, right? No, ideally, people aren't going to see your underwear underneath your pants, assuming you're wearing your underwear, but it's generally recommended to wear underwear, right? And it's generally recommended to wear clean underwear. I don't know. I think I'm getting further from the, but that anyway, the underwear serves a purpose, and people wear underwear, just like underpainting serves a purpose. There we are. Okay. Okay. I almost got lost there on a bizarre tangent. Maybe I'm still trapped in the tangent, like the Matrix or something. Okay. So that's good. We've got really almost half of the painting locked in as a underpainting. So now let's think about adding some warmer colors here, because here's our background, and now we're going to move, this is our middle ground here, these mountains, and then as we get closer to the bottom is our foreground, right? So cool colors, warmer colors, warmest colors, right? And we can have, you know, in their middle ground area, and the middle ground is often literally in the middle of a painting, especially if you're doing a landscape, right? So we can add some cool colors into our warm colors here, and then as we go down here we have pure warm colors. And just as I mentioned, because this came up also in the Facebook group, is you could still have cold colors in your foreground. You could, because you might need, like, there could be somebody walking by with a cool blue jacket, right? So it's not like, oh, well, I guess I have to omit that person, or I got to paint their jacket warm blue instead. Like, oh, that's a bummer. What I would do is I would just paint it warm blue or warm red or whatever. You could put any warm color underneath it, and then put a cool color over top, so that warm color is still coming through the cold color and just pushing it forward, so that it's, because otherwise you have this weird experience of this bright cool color going backwards. Now because you don't want to have something that's really cold on the surface pushing itself backwards, and then as a viewer it's like a little bit you might not even, you're like, there is something weird about this painting, I can't figure out what it is. Like, I don't know. And it's often because we know warm and cool colors work. Our eyes and our brain know this, but it's taken me 25 plus years to wrap my head around it. So if you're sitting and you're like, I don't know, all this stuff is just like confusing, tell me about it, man. It took me forever. So I try my best to explain this as simply as possible. I think the secret to figuring it out is by doing it. And when you do it over and over and over, ideally, my hope is it starts to, you just start instinctually understanding it. Okay, so let's move to these browns and warmer colors here. And of course, we can make a warm brown, but we can also make a cool brown too, and which we've done many times in the past. All right, as I said, this is painting 110. So let's make a warm brown now. I think that's what we should do next, and then we can add a little bit of the cool colors in it just to put it in the middle ground. So let's take our warm yellow, and then our warm red, and we're just going to mix this together. We get an orange, right? And these two colors together, warm yellow and warm red, make the most saturated of oranges possible, right? Because they're on the outside of the color wheel, so we're going to get a nice saturated orange. And that's great, but if we look at this painting, we don't see any big bright areas of orange, right? So we're not going to use this color on its own. So we want to convert this orange into a brown. So the way to do that is basically you add a yellow, a red, and a blue to make a brown. So we take some blue, that's probably way too much. So like you see, I just put it to the side, and then I can just scrub it in. I can add a little bit more as needed. And since this color will get darker as we go, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of it here so that I'm also not getting so much orange mixed into that blue down there. Okay, and I got lots of this paint creeping up the brush, so that's why I spin it around and try to get some of that paint off. Now, this is not the final color that we're going to use, but if we just take a little second here and we zoom in on this painting, this isn't orange, but it is not too far off from this color that I have right here. So we've got this kind of a light brown, orangey brown, and I'm going to use that color a few different places in this painting. So, in fact, I think what I'm going to do here, since I've got this mixed up, I'm going to take it, let's figure out where this white strip is here. That is somewhere there, right? Don't have to be perfect. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this. I'm going to paint this kind of brownish orange. And I'm going to paint it kind of around here on the foreground. And then I'm going to mix some cooler colors into it back here. So doing something just a slightly bit different than what I was planning on doing, but you know, once you get a color mixed onto your painting or on your palette, it's like, oh, I want to use it now. So let's just go to this bottom right corner here. Okay. So that's the eastern edge of this landscape here. Let's go all the way to the right here. And again, right, I'm using a big brush. I'm being very bold with my brush strokes. Probably as she would have been too. Like, this is a kind of a feature of her work, and also of the artists that she spent time with, right? Like A.Y. Jackson and such. You know, we're very bold with their choices. So let's also I'm just going to take maybe a little bit of, let's zoom out for a second here. I'm going to take just a little bit of cool blue and add that into this color. Not a lot, but I'm going to take that. And you know what? I'm just going to go right over. I was going to do a little bit of, I don't want to even be doing any fiddling around. Let's just get that locked in here. This big shape. All right, just slightly different color than the one down there. I'm going to do the same here on this side. And let's just do the same thing. Okay. And then let's just zoom out. Yeah, zoom back out. Compare these together side by side. I mean, I could have just done that whole thing brown. It's not that big of a deal that I stopped where I did, but I think that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with all of this so far. So I'm just gonna clean this brush. Okay. That's the thing with some of these cheap brushes. Remember, in that episode where that I made a year ago, where I talked about which paints to I suggest you get to make these paintings with me. I also bought 2 packs of paintbrushes. I think one from Michael's and one from Opus Art Supply here in Vancouver. And I think I spent $30 in total for about 15 brushes. I'm still using them today. I've made 110 paintings with them, and it does help to, you can spend easily $50 on a really good brush that you can pass down generation to generation, and it's going to be a beautiful brush. Will a beginner painter notice the difference? I have probably $1,000 worth of brushes in behind me, but I'm deliberately using the least expensive materials possible so that beginners can join right in with me. Okay, so I'm going to paint the snow here next. I'm basically just going to use white and warm blue here. So let's take a little bit of warm blue and some white. You can see here's the difference between the cool blue with white and the warm blue with white. So I mix this up. Now this is going to be a little bit intense, but we can also modify. We're going to paint over top of it afterwards. So I'm just going to paint this in here. So right now it looks like there's these little ponds of water or something. We're going to put more white over top of these, but I think this is going to be nice little, because snow glows, reflects all this light, so we want it to have that bright kind of quality. Right, again, you can see that I'm using this big wide brush. I'm just putting it on its side to get into some of those nooks and crannies. And then for this kind of snow a little bit further into the background, I'm just going to take some of this cool blue, mix it a little bit into my warm blue. So we got a little bit of both, a bit more, almost like a cobalt blue. I'll just paint this all the way across. Okay, and right there, what I would hope that you see in this painting, this, I almost hesitate to say this because I'm sort of leading you, but what I would hope is that if you could see that, does this not look like it's further away than this down here? We got our cool colors up here and warmer colors down here. And this should feel like it's closer to us. Like if we do that, we have our cool colors down here and our warm colors up here. And if you can try to not think of it as a landscape, it should feel like almost that this is kind of falling on top of us. Now, not everybody sees it that way. And it took me a while to understand that. The only way that the way that I came to understand how warm and cool colors work is really not really noticing when it's working, but being confused when things weren't working. And just being like, there is something that's like weird in this painting, and maybe the proportions are off, what's going on? And then when you start understanding how warm and cool colors work, again, it's this unconscious activity your brain is doing. So we're trying to access that unconscious part of the viewer's mind by using the warm and cool colors in different spaces. Okay. Lots of people watching in a very quiet chat, so that usually tells me a lot of people are painting, because people will be like, oh, I'm here watching, but I just was like so busy painting along, and you're going really, really fast, so I wasn't able to type anything. So remember, you can always pause these videos even when we're filming live. You can, if there's any questions you want to ask, feel free to ask them as well. Everything's still a little bit wet, but I also, one of the things too that I do when I'm painting is when I'm doing this underpainting. So now I have a finished underpainting. I often paint really fast and also quite thin, right? So thin, quick layers just to get everything in place, or composition. I would be willing to bet a good sizable amount of money that Henrietta Mabel May, if you were to walk into her studio back in 1925 or 1924 when she painted this painting, possibly side by side with A.Y. Jackson, because in 1924 she went to Quebec, well, because she was sort of moving all over the place. She was a very active personality. She went and painted alongside A.Y. Jackson, and it's possible that she was making this painting with him. I don't know if he was painting the same thing or painting something else in a different direction, right? But I think, when we look at those two artists side by side, there's a lot of similarities, and there is probably I think most people would say, oh, well, she's very influenced by Lauren Harris and A.Y. Jackson, etc. I would venture to say that there's probably a lot of influence going the other way as well. Even though the members of the group of seven were all educated artists, had all gone to some type of art school or evening classes, etc., they were all trained. So was she, and I would say she probably was trained by better artists than any of them were. So if anybody knew their stuff, I would put money on it that she was kind of a more more well-rounded intellectual, had a better understanding of color than any of those artists did, at least at that time in their careers, right? So, because yeah, there's this thing that whenever we talk about female painters, that of course they're indebted to all these male artists, but like I said, she is one of those artists that I think is the reason why I think she's so important. Is I think many of the great artists in Canadian history that we've come to know were looking at her for inspiration and looking over her shoulder for what to do next. Okay. So, if we look at these paintings side by side, this is almost totally dry, a little bit of wet here, but we don't have to wait for it to completely dry. If you did want to switch to oil paints, you could do that now. This would be where you would want to get to before you switch to oil paints. This would also be a great place to end for the day if you wanted to stop painting and go and buy The Comfort Crisis, or at your local bookstore before it closes. Okay, so what should we do next? What I want to do is move up into the sky and paint some of we have now some warm colors that we want to put up there. So, like I said, now that we've got cool colors here, we can paint warm colors over top of them, and that cool colors is going to sort of suck that warm color back into the space. Now we've got a warm yellow underneath here and a warm blue, and if we paint warm white over top of it, it's going to pull forward. Does that make sense? So you sort of got, how would you characterize it? Like a minus and a plus, they sort of cancel each other out. We've got two pluses here, so they're pushing forward. Okay, so let's see. I want to use this. Basically, we can see we've got this. It's almost like this warm blue right here. So let's get a little bit more white on the palette. I think this tube is almost out. In fact, I'll just show you what I've been doing over the past little while. Is I've got lots of these tubes of paint that are almost empty. So what I've been doing is consolidating them, and maybe I'll just do a little bit of that right now. Where's my tool here? So this is what I do with my tubes of paint, because I'm going to probably use all this white. I love this tool. You get this from an art supply store, the tube ringer. I think it's way too expensive. It's probably like $30 or $40. I've had this for probably 20 years. And you don't use it all the time, but when you do need it or use it, it is like the coolest thing on earth. You can see it's pushing all the paint down here. Let's get all of these guys out of the way. Okay. And then I just take this, like, look, it's scooped. That's, in fact, that's probably more white than we're going to use today, but if I didn't do that, we could have just scooped all of that paint out, or thrown that tube of paint into the garbage. And here we are, we've managed to get a lot more paint out of here. So, well, maybe we'll use a lot of that. We'll see. And usually there's very little left in here if you use that device. Okay. So now this is garbage. You can't really recycle it because it's got all that paint on it. So, I just put paint all over my face. Sometimes at the end of these painting sessions, I get so much paint all over me. So, what was I going to do? We're going to put blue, warm blue into the sky now. Let's go. Now I'm going to go much smaller. Remember, I used quite a large brush to get my underpainting done. Now that we're getting into the details, because really, we're going to finish the sky in the next like 20 minutes, 30 minutes at most. So we want to go to a smaller brush to kind of lock in some of these details. So this brush is a broken brush, but I kind of like it. It somehow feels kind of nice. So there's two ways we can go about this. We could start with white and then slowly add blue and brighten it up, or go or start with the blue and get darker. We'll just see with that mixture where we're at here. Not bad. Maybe let's just start like this. We can brighten it as needed. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna add more white here. So this allows me to also kind of feel out the shape of these clouds, right? We really want to emphasize the curving structure of those clouds. So as we go here, we'll brighten some of that up and we'll darken a few small parts of it. Let's get a bit more warm blue under here. Okay. You see now how that almost sits in front of the other cool blues. Let me get a bit more warm blue on here. Okay. It's a little bit more warm blue. For this shape over here. Where else kind of has that? It's still a little bit wet, so I can kind of blend it in a little bit. Let's get some more white on here. So I'm still, it's almost like this is now the bridge between the underpainting and the finished painting. I start kind of just laying in some big shapes, and then we're going to get more and more specific shortly here. So there's definitely going to be more white that will go up there, but we're not quite there yet. Let's, I'm just going to go a little bit darker now with our warm blue. Anything else? Yeah, let's get even more blue on here. Okay. Maybe not quite so dark, but we'll put this warm blue up here. Now, there is this little bits of brown that are in the sky. We'll get all that, I think, shortly here. Yeah, it's like Deborah was saying, the Lauren Harris quality. You really feel that in the way that she's abstracting all of these shapes here. In fact, this reminds me a lot more of the kinds of paint, like if we just isolate this up here, it reminds me a lot of the paintings Lauren Harris made in the 60s, or 50s and 60s, those total abstract paintings that he was working on. So it's interesting. It's almost like, she is, about 50 years ahead of him. So, and then we've got, so this is still definitely cool blues down here. So it does seem like this is closer to us, like coming over top. What else can we do right here with this paint? We'll go back into some white. Some of these subtle effects that she's doing there. Okay, I'll actually maybe take a bit more of this white. Just bring it in on the edge, the corner up here. Okay, a bit more. Again, this is warm blue over top of the cool blue that we painted earlier. And don't worry about going over top of this, right? Because we can all, remember I was saying we can take these middle ground shapes and put them over top of the background later on. It's almost like a dry brush that I'm painting right now. Okay. So, that feels pretty good, especially how we're doing with time. We're doing great with time. Let me see. Should we finish off the sky? Let's do a little bit more work in the sky. We might want to do a little bit more touching up later on, but I think I'm really excited with like the time that we're on right here. So I'm just slowly adding a little bit more white each time I'm dipping back in here. Maybe let's zoom in. Come on, why is he bouncing like that? Okay. And, you know, I can see, as I look in this, I see little bits of yellows and pinks and browns. So I think we'll paint a little bit more of this. And then we'll move down to the middle ground. And then later on we'll come back up and add a little bit more of that color in here. So this is like very subtle little, like I'm slowly just getting a little bit more white on the brush as I go here. Now I'm not super concerned about getting the perfect shape of these clouds like in her painting. Obviously I painted over all my pencil lines from the outline there. That's never really been a particularly big concern of mine in any of these episodes. But, okay, I'll put that down. And then I'm just going to take this brush, and let's get maybe a little bit more of the darker blue. Let's get maybe some more white. In fact, let's just mix. And I'm going to be painting some white over top of these lines. I'm not even too concerned about making them too thick or anything, right? I'm not entirely 100% sure that this is how she did these, but it makes the most sense to me in my professional opinion. Let's see. So again, not exactly like what she did up there, but when we start adding other colors in here, we can make these more or less pronounced, or just paint over them entirely. They don't have to be there at all. Just look here. This is a little bit more gray, so what I would actually think about doing is maybe taking a bit of this cool blue we had from before, give it a bit more white. I think this might be a little bit, I think it should be a little bit more grayish than what I'm doing here, but I kind of like it too, so. Let's move this back to here. So that's the left side of the painting there, right? And we've got, let's zoom out a bit. Wow, that's the... I don't know if I've ever seen the chat so quiet. When it gets really quiet like that, I would start to worry if the feed is stopped, considering how many people are watching. So this is it's a cool blue. This is the same cool blue that we put basically in the background before we put this warm blue over top of it. I don't know if I want to keep these pretty bold lines, but it's also kind of nice to put them in here. Okay, now it's a little bit tricky. We have this big little kind of line going all the way across. So it might be easier if we just actually draw a line on the canvas here. Let's actually get even a ruler. Let's see, we kind of want it to end right about there. Now I had a pencil line underneath all of this, but it's long gone. Now I know I say I don't usually like using rulers in my paintings. Personally, I would just eyeball this. But I know that for some people, the idea of just eyeballing things, especially if you're a beginner artist, is like saying, get on this tightrope and walk across this tightrope that's between these two giant buildings. Even if you've never done it before, just do it. It'll be fine. Who cares if you fall and break your neck? You're like, yeah, sorry, I'm not going to do that. So, don't feel free to use whatever solutions you can to help get that painting done. Maybe that could have been even a bit darker, right? Okay. So I think what I want to do is we could really just finish the sky right now. I think what I would like to do is move on, but I would like to be able to try to get where the sky and the ground meet up, at least that part as close to being done as possible, so that I can put the outlines of the middle ground shapes over top of them. So it's not necessarily imperative that I finish up here, but it would be good if we get close to finishing down here. So let me just think, how far are we from that? There's definitely some white with some yellow in here, white with yellow, browns. Let's finish, I think, this area here. And, well, you know what? We could... I mean, we probably will have to come back and do a little bit of touching up back and forth, as always seems to happen, but... So this is now moving back into my warm blue. I'm not happy with that, so just rub it out with my finger real quick. Those are a little bit intense, but let me see. Oops. Oh, not bad actually there. This is warm blue and white. Okay. Still warm blue and white. As I get closer down here. I'm going to put more white down right by the hills here, which looks like she was doing as well. Okay, let's take a bit more of this warm blue and white. As I said, do I want to finish off the... I would like to... I forgot I got so much white left. Okay, so let's see if I can use up some of the... Here I'm sort of being selective with my white use, and I forgot I squeezed like a ton of it onto the table. Okay. Or my palette. Wow, okay, lots of things in the chat there. Okay. Be careful what you wish for. Okay, there's lots of questions. Okay, let me just let's get a little bit more here. So now I can just kind of come in and just sort of trim these down a little bit. Right, I find this a little bit easier to do than trying to like really fuss about making really thin lines. Especially if I know that I'm going to be putting like a white or something over here to brighten this area up anyway. Okay, so I think I'll leave that there. We're going to come back, finish that sky off maybe towards the very end. And I think let's move down to the bottom down here. So let's just kind of take a quick look at how these paintings compare. Oops, oh, there we are, side by side. So right now this has a bit of a cartoony quality, right? Because we just have basically like two colors. We got a white and an outline. There's no real nuance in there, so that's why it looks a little bit odd. But we're gonna get some other colors in here. As I said, there's gonna be some yellows and maybe a little bit of pink in here too. So we'll get to that shortly. Maybe while I'm gonna clean a few brushes and take a look in the chat. Good questions. Okay, so right off the top, Les asks, does white move a color closer to... Does white move a color cooler or warmer? So, in other words, I guess another way, is white warm or cool? So white is generally like a neutral color that you can use to modify any other hue or color. So it doesn't usually have any color temperature in and of itself. But there are some whites that might have a little bit more of a warmer or cooler temperature. One thing we haven't talked about is the different kinds of white. Let me see if this is something I want to get into right now. Short story is that white, at least titanium white, should be neutral. Should be just, it doesn't matter. It won't. It will take on whatever color temperature you mix into it. There are, yeah, I think I'll save, because there. If you go to your art supply store, you may see things like flake white or flake white replacement or zinc white, which have a very different effect on your paint, mostly in how opaque or transparent that color is and how much it will tint the color. Titanium white, which is the most common white, usually if you go to your art supply store and you buy a tube of white paint, it's titanium white. If it doesn't say anything, 9 times out of 10 titanium white. Because zinc white and flake white, especially flake white, can be quite expensive. That's why there's flake white replacement, also because flake white on its own can be quite toxic. Same thing with zinc white. So a lot of those whites are more expensive. So most likely things that your beginner or even intermediate artist won't even bother touching because they're usually 2-3 times the price. But great question. Yeah. Paula says, just paying attention for the color mixing. Hopefully can do better this time. My color mixing last painting was a disaster. Really? Which one did you... I don't even remember what we did. That was the Ted Harrison. I can't remember how you... I haven't seen any paintings on the Facebook group that are a disaster. Just the fact that you guys are making these paintings is incredible. Like... really, yeah, just getting your feet wet is the big step, and trying, and even if they're not turning out exactly the way you want, they are guaranteed way better than anybody else who's not painting at all, or if they just sat down and tried to paint. You're miles ahead of any of those people, and sometimes it's a little bit hard to forget because all you see is the road in front of you, and you're not looking behind you. But if you look at some of your older paintings, you'd be like shocked, like, whoa, I didn't realize how far I've come. Wow, wow, okay. So sometimes it's worth just taking a little bit of a quick glance behind you and looking at some of your older paintings, and I think you will see that the improvement is quite spectacular. And artists, we're always we're our worst critics, as the saying goes, right? Eleanor says, I have been wondering for the last couple of days is this. If the opposite colors complement each other across the color wheel, what colors complement the colors in the core of the color wheel? Interesting. Well, it's sort of like... It's interesting. I've never really thought of it that way, Eleanor. The center of the color wheel is neutral. It's your neutral core, right? And so what... Okay, so just... What Eleanor's talking about is, here's our outside of the color wheel, right? And we have our primary colors, 2 yellows, 2 reds, and 2 blues, right? And these are the colors that result when you mix this color with this color, you get these. When you mix these 2 colors, you get these. You mix these 2 colors, you get these, right? And then when you mix these, you see where these lines are. So your question is, so when we talk about complementary colors are usually the colors that are opposite from one another on the color wheel. So red and green, or yellow and purple, or orange and blue. Those are your complementary colors. And artists often use opposite colors on the color wheel for, in design. You see this all the time in logo design. Like, let's think about like your hockey teams, right? Like, you'd see like the Montreal Canadiens, right? You have blue and reds. What are some other... I can't think of any other hockey team. Or the old Los Angeles Kings is purple and yellow, right? Anyway, I can't think of any other hockey teams off the top of my head, but or any other sports teams for that matter. But so your question is a neutral core. What complements this? Well, grays tend to complement any color. When I was a kid, my favorite color was gray. This shows you kind of how much of an artist I've always been, because everything kind of goes with gray. You can wear bright pink socks with gray pants. You can wear, white socks. You can wear black socks, browns. Everything is going to go with gray. Gray sweater goes with everything, right? Because it's a neutral color. So what would complement it is just generally, I mean, you know, browns and grays work generally really well together. If you look at all classical paintings, have a lot of brown and gray in them. That's going to stick in my head. I'll think about that a little bit more. Paul says, does depending on where the sun shines, lighter or darker, you say warm or cold? Okay. That's another big question, I think, if I understand you correctly. So, sunlight is not always warm. We can have cool light from the sun and warm light from the sun. And it has a great deal of difference as to where the sun is in the sky, or what time of day it is, essentially, right? Because when the sun is right above us, I got something in my eye here. Sorry. When the sun is right above you, we have like a really strong, intense light, and it tends to be actually a little bit. It's a harsh light, and it can actually be a little bit bluish. You tend to also find a bit of bluish light in the morning, all right, as it's burning off the moisture in the atmosphere, and then as it goes, the sun starts going down. How to even describe that? Like, okay, so if you think of this as your planet Earth, and this is my sun, right? So if this is you standing here, the sun is right, and obviously the Earth rotates around the sun, not the sun going, but we're just for this thing, right? So if this is you right here, the sun is coming right down on top. There's very little atmosphere that it has to go through, right? So the sun just comes right down. It's harsh. But when it's down here, the sun is shining through the atmosphere is kind of thicker. It's got to go through more layers of atmosphere, so it loses some of the intensity of that light, and it tends to be much warmer, which is why in the afternoons, evenings, you get what's called like the golden hour, or that golden warm light that happens. Does that make sense? Okay, I got to get back to the painting here. And lastly, Joshua asked, what surface was Mabel May using for most of her time in her paintings? To be honest, I don't know. I suspect it was just canvas. Just that's what it looks like, just canvas or maybe panels. A lot of the group of 7 were painting on like plywood type of wood. Sometimes just bare wood. Tom Thompson painting on bare wood. Okay, so let's do this brown more. We did an initial layer of brown. I think what I want to do next is mix some of this white that's in here on this snow. We can even take that same color, start applying it elsewhere. So what I'm going to do, we got again lots of white. I'm going to put this white over here, and I'm going to take a bit of magenta, my cool red, which we haven't really used much of thus far. That's way too much pink, but let's just get a bit more white on here. So, and that's too big of a brush. Let's go to something a little bit smaller. And why don't we just zoom in a bit? Okay. So we're painting like white with this cool red in it. It's going over top of that warmish, mostly warmish brown. We did put a little bit of cool blue in there, I think. Okay. Let's just take some of this again, this little bit of magenta. Okay. Guess that's the edge of my painting. I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger since, like, this is the, oh, there is more. Okay, oops, I thought that was the edge of the painting. Was there anything more over here? We're going to paint over some of that. Similarly, let's put let's I'm just gonna put a little bit of it in this, closer to our foreground here. And then if I look up into the sky, I'm going to take a bit, again, this magenta, not too much of it. We'll just put a few. Bits. Oh, I also see that right here. Most of this, as my brush starts to dry out, it becomes a dry brush, right? And I can use that to kind of scrub in a little bit, get a bit of that color on here. And it's pretty subtle, which I like. Where did that go? bit too much. It's okay. Take that. If you, another way of doing the dry brush is you get literally paint on your brush right from the palette and just rub it off a little bit. I might have to do a little bit less rubbing off. Okay. Some magenta and white, my cool red. Right in this little valley between all of that. I'm just taking a bit more magenta in a few places. So some of this pink, cool red won't survive very far. It's going to be mostly just completely disguised. Right now I'm just going to kind of dry brush, blend them in a bit more. Let's see, is there any of that? Not really elsewhere. Okay. So let's just back it out and just so you can see what that did to the painting. So these little subtle hints of that pink. Now I'm going to use some cold yellow and put that into here. So I'm just going to clean up a little bit of paint that's been building up. Okay, so let's take, oh, I'll just do this right over here. Let's zoom back in a bit. Remember, don't worry about painting over top of the ground, because that's going to get covered up soon. Mostly it's kind of just like that red right along the edge of the mountain. You can see I'd sort of take my finger and blend it out a little bit, and Okay. Just going to scrub a little bit of that extra paint off and then dry brush this a bit. Just take even a little bit of that paint that's on that rag. So what this is like a really nice use of subtle colors she's using. Like I'm even, if anything, being a little bit more bold than she is. I can scrub this in here. If I go a little bit too wild, I can always just mute this down later. And I might even do that myself, we'll see. Although you probably know by now, or those of you who have been with me for a while, that I do like a little bit more saturated colors, so a little bit extra brightness is not something that bothers me particularly, but okay, so we'll back out just so you can see what the overall effect of that was. So it does look a little bit more intense than hers. Maybe a little bit, again, a little cartoony. I think what my next step here is I want to put the colors into the middle ground and work my way down. I'm going to take a break from the sky for a few moments. Although I just want to get a bit more. Because what I can, if depending on, like I don't want to, I can't even really finish the sky. Even if I wanted to completely finish it, it's possible I get that all done and then I start working on here, and then this starts to look funny because of what I've done here, and then I have to adjust it. So rather than, and because I after years of experience with precisely that happening, I might as well move down here, get closer here, and then this will tell me what it needs as this starts to fill up. Okay. But I love the way that looks right now. I think it's really cool. So previously we mixed this warm brown that we used pretty much all over the place, right? We used it down here. We added a little bit of cool blue for back there. So we're just going to do the same thing. We're just going to actually we're going to have to mix some more. So let's take this warm yellow, this warm red, warm blue, mix it together. We're going to need a lot more of it, so I might as well just make a bigger batch. I mean, I do like to use my colors, remix the colors all the time, but we're going to be using a bunch of this, so I might as well just prep it. So right now this is a very reddish brown. Take a bit of warm blue, mix this into here. It still could go darker. Let's take a lot more blue. If it starts going too green, then we just add a little bit more red back into it. Okay, so I'm going to use this color right now for this area, and then I'm going to add some cool blue, a lot more cold blue into it. So let's zoom in. Okay. We're probably going to darken that here shortly, so I'm not going to get too fixated on that. Let's do this here. I know this is going to go blue eventually, but I just want to give it a good grounding of the brown, because there is this brown underneath it. I think you can really see a kind of a brown halo underneath here, right? Okay. So here's where we start getting some of the nuance of the actual mountains, these in the background. You can spend as much time as you want trying to kind of get those shapes correct, quote unquote, as you like, but you may ask, like, okay, why did I put this white here when in the original there isn't real, but there is. I don't know if you could see this. Let's just zoom in a little bit. She's painted something white and then painted over top of it. So similarly, what I just did back here, you see how there was some white and I painted over top of it? That white is going to glow through, depending on how thick of a layer I put over top of it. But I'm going to paint this kind of just brown and let some of the blue that I paint over here later deal with it. That's a little bit more of an advanced approach to painting, but so you don't have to do anything that I'm doing, but I'm just sort of letting you know what I'm up to. Oops. I know that, you know, for some people, like what I'm doing right now, where I'm just going by eye and doing some of this stuff, it can be pretty intimidating for some people. And if you don't have those pencil lines, it's just like, oh goodness, what is he doing? You don't have, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Don't worry about, like, if you were just to make that one solid line going across, that's fine. Doesn't, I mean, you do what you can. You don't allow yourself to get all worked up and upset and hard on yourself about things working or not working, or it's just painting, right? You're just making a painting. It should be fun. So if you feel compelled to want to, I don't know, put an airplane or flying saucer in this painting, go right ahead. You have my permission. In fact, I think it would be fun. Okay, so I'm going to take this same color. We're just going to keep on going down. I think we're going to go down to the... maybe I'll just show you what that looks like, actually. Okay. Alright, so this is just warm yellow, warm red, warm blue. As you can see that this is actually quite dark. There's some blue over top of this. We could mix that into the color as well. I'm not going to keep it... Well, we'll see. I might do these in separate layers. Also, as I start getting closer to the foreground, rather than these big solid blocks, you can see that I'm just sort of now being a little more painterly. Allowing kind of a little bit more loose brush strokes. Here's a little bit more yellow, warm yellow in there. So I'm just sort of spreading. Oh, I didn't even. Maybe there's some kind of weird thing going on here. What have I? There's something in there. Well, we haven't really paid too much attention to the bottom part of the canvas yet, anyway. So, okay. What should we do next? Let's take some. I'm going to put some more warm blue into this. Let's mix a bit more of this brown. Actually, even yeah, let's take a bit more blue in here. I'm just gonna put this around here. Okay, now I'm going to take a bunch more blue. And there's a bit of white in there, that's okay. So where's this? There's this fence. It's kind of coming up from here. Comes across. Okay, so this is a road. Okay, these are tracks from. So now I'm starting to kind of try to decode what's going on here. So this is a road, obviously, and maybe this is tracks where cars or sleighs and things have been going over top of. Do you see how kind of like rough I treat the painting? I don't baby it, you know, like I get my fingers in there and smush the paint around. I'm moving things up and down. And slowly these colors are getting closer and closer. Okay, so just gonna clean that off. Joshua says, "Hey Markowsky, another question. How do I clean my brushes properly? It's really difficult to clean them and make them still durable after acrylic painting sessions." This is, it sounds like this is perfect product placement, but I just happen to have this from last time I was at the art supply store. This company, what are they called? What is the brand name? The Masters Art Soap or Brush Cleaner. I use this. Probably not. I actually have lots of it. I don't use it necessarily all the time. In fact, often I just use a little bit of like dish soap. So at the end of the day, even these these brushes that I used at the very beginning, you know, that they've been in the water, you know, I take them out and I just get some dish soap on my hand and I just rub them around and around for just a couple minutes. Put it under the water and wash it out. You can use this brush cleaner. You can, in fact, I think if I recall, you can put it in there and just leave it in there, and then I think you can. It's like a brush conditioner as well. It's sort of like conditioner for your hair. It softens up the bristles. I do that a lot more. I do that all the time when I'm using oil paints. But with acrylic paints, it's as long as you wash out all of, like, the paint starts to get up into the metal part here, the ferrule as it's called. So the main thing I'm most concerned about is not really the paint on here, is inside here. So I'm really, when I get it in there, I'm really kind of brushing around in there trying to get that paint out. Okay, so I think the next thing I want to do is let's add some cool blue into this mixture. Into this brown. The cool blue, if we just do this separately, you'll see it. Cool blue and warm red together make a really nice dark color. So I can make, so it basically looks like black there on camera. That's great. I can mix it into this brown that I have already, and it's going to get me a nice dark brown. So we'll use that right now, and then we'll add as necessary. So I'll show you too what I'm doing. Okay, let's go. Actually, let's stay right here for a second. I'm just going to go down to a bit of a smaller brush. Okay. So I'm going to go back over some of this with a dark, cool blue. So I'm just going to wait on that. So I'm not going to paint all of this in. To leave like kind of little spots of darker areas. And Okay. Zoom back out a bit. Now I wonder, should I trim this out here? Now, one thing that I'm trying to do as I do these, as I want to be going left and right, horizontally lines, right, to emphasize the layers of in the distance here. Unless there was some feature, I want to try to avoid any. I really want to try to avoid any vertical lines whatsoever. Diagonal lines are okay because they're going to be pulling us in towards the center. But I'm really trying to avoid vertical lines. So I'm just allowing kind of different colors to just wind up on the paintbrush. So we have this kind of dark bluish brown, but I want as much variation as possible to kind of give the landscape a feeling of variety and tried a little bit of red in there, but it's a little too intense, but I'd mute it down a bit. Not so bad. I know it's not exactly what she did there, but so I'm still kind of just shaping out all of this stuff here. Oh, okay, I see what's going on. That ends there. Okay. Now I'm going to go to this much darker color that I have, that I mixed with my warm red and cold blue. So I'm putting these lines to really help reinforce that movement. They'll probably disappear a little bit or be kind of... Actually, no, I'm looking at it. I see those lines there too. That feels good. And I'm like, ah, look. As I look at it, she did the same thing. You can see them. They're really dark in there. You see them. My intuition is correct. Not always, but on the odd occasion. Okay, this is good. I think we're going to need a little bit more of a purple in here. I think that what we need is some magenta and the warm blue in here. We'll get a purple, so we'll come back up and do that shortly. But I'm feeling pretty good about the bottom half of the painting. So this goes again, I said this earlier, that there's no point in finishing that sky or doing what you think is finishing the sky before you finish the ground, because, you know, I don't know, 45 minutes ago, I thought, I pretty much nailed the colors. They look great. Now that I get the bottom in here, the sky starts to become, wow, whoa, you're way off, right? And that's because now I was seeing the sky out of context without the bottom, which is much darker. And now it seems obvious. You're just like, wow, how could I got the colors in the sky so wrong? You know, I think it doesn't surprise me in the least. Some people might be like, oh no, you know, like, how did I do, like, why does that? It's just, it's because you're seeing it out of context. I saw it out of context. Maybe there's some brilliant people there who, I mean, maybe it's probably easier for you to see on the screen at home, but I think this is, for me, it's just a good example of why I do what I do, because had I really perfected that, I would be sitting here going like, whereas I knew that I was going to need a little bit more massaging in the sky. Let's take a sip of tea. So what should we do next here? I'm thinking I want to add some warmer white down here in the foreground. I'm feeling pretty good up here. I think let's do warmer white. And yeah, I mean, I think I'm getting pretty close. So what color should... So this warm... Okay, so this white down here is like white with a bit of this warm brown as well. So it's kind of like a brownish white. Where should we do that? So we're going to begin with this little bit of a kind of a slightly off white. And then we can brighten it or darken it as required. See, now I notice that it's sort of curving as it goes over the hill here. And I like when some of these colors start to just mix into this white. I can always go back and lighten stuff. I'm going to have to do a little bit of fine-tuning there anyway, but anyway, let's so you can see I'm not obsessed with covering everything. I want some of those previous layers poking through a little bit. See how this I like this, it's almost like a little bit of a muddy brown, I think it's really nice. I think a really smart choice on her part. Okay. Now it's possible I don't know if she did this. Some of this could be glazing on here. I'm not entirely 100% sure. And right now my brush is starting to get quite dry, and there's not a lot of paint left on obviously I could mix more, but I kind of like it when it starts to dry out a little bit, because it's just like the it's kind of like I'm glazing a little. We did this a lot in our intro to painting series, right, where we really rather than using, because we didn't use a lot of glazing fluid until really towards the very end of that series of classes. We did a lot of dry brushing. Okay, so now I'm just trying to take this same kind of bit of a muddy-ish yellow, or white, sorry, and going back into the background here. Right, like this paint here is really dry. Like you can see very little paint is coming off, but I love that. That's what I want. Just adding a little more brown into this. Now, truthfully, as I'm painting this, part of me is thinking, is it possible that some of these browns and yellows are not just a glaze, but possibly the yellowed varnish? Like that we're looking at a painting that hasn't yet been cleaned, and that I honestly is a very likely possibility. It's possible that this painting was a little bit brighter, and what I'm doing is sort of making a reproduction of the painting before it's been cleaned, and so in that case, it's possible that a few years from now this painting will get cleaned and new varnish, and this paint in my version might then start to look really bizarre. You'll be like, people of the future be like, why did he paint it so brown? Like, that's such a bizarre series of, and then you're like, oh well, he painted the before the varnished version. That's possible. But at the same time, I do think that this painting, this reminds me a lot of many different places in Canada. This painting is called Melting Snow, right? And when that snow starts to melt in the beginning of spring, there is that time where everything is kind of muddy and brown until because everything's just wet, and then for a few weeks there it's kind of gross. And then it melts away. Some places melts faster than others, and then everything starts to get green pretty quick. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but it's fun to kind of speculate, right? Let's take a bit of this brown and just going to go up into the clouds a little bit. Just dry brushing this. I'll probably do a bit of this as a glaze, but I just want to show you that if you don't have any glazing fluid, you can do this. Just a little bit of patience. Paula says, did you say not to add water into the acrylic paints? What about wetting the brush to get moisture? Generally, ideally, you don't want to be putting water in your acrylic paints if you can help it. Rather than putting water into your acrylic paints, what I would be using is some other type of medium, as they're called, like a glazing fluid or slow dry medium. Slow dry medium, otherwise also called paint retarder, because it retards the drying process. Slow dry medium is another way of saying the same thing. Glazing fluid, we've talked many times about the difference between these two things, but if I assume what you're talking about, Paula, is you want to be painting and you want a nice fluid brush stroke, and as the paint dries and we get that dry brush technique, which is what I've been doing, a lot of dry brush, which is fun, but it can also be like, oh, I'm just getting I want a nice fluid mark, right? So and a lot of times people add water into their acrylic paint to get that, because it makes sense. There's water in the acrylic paint, and if you add more water in it, it should be, especially if the paint starts to dry, you add water, it kind of makes it seem more fluid. But it's making it more transparent, and it's breaking down the bonds in the paint. And it's also, because it's breaking it down, you sometimes notice, especially if you had a lot of water, it starts to get like a grainy quality. You'll notice that particularly with black, or often like dark pigments. If you mix like a bunch of colors and you get a dark color with or without black, and then you add a lot of water into it, I find it has this a look that it looks like sandy kind of a texture, and it's miserable to blend with a paint that's got a lot of water in it. But I know a lot of beginners, are still on the fence of whether they want to invest in. How much is there a price tag on this? I think this is a new bottle I bought, right? Because this one I've done 100 or so, actually I did maybe 60, because we didn't use this for the first 30 or so paintings, right? But for I think this was maybe somewhere between $15 to $25. I can't remember how much glazing fluid costs, but I would much rather use glazing fluid or some kind of medium to get more fluid rather than adding water. So water is your last resort. Only use it at the beginning of the painting, if at all. That's my personal opinion. I'm sure there's some other people out there who've got very different opinions on all of this, and I'm not the only artist out there, right? So there's more than one way to skin a cat, as they say, right? But I think most acrylic painters would tell you the same thing, that you want to try to avoid putting water into your paints. People often put water in their acrylics because they're so used to painting with watercolor, because watercolor is often how people learn how to paint. And people in watercolor, you need water to activate the paint. So they're just like, oh, this is just like watercolor, but just a thicker paint. No. Apples and oranges, totally different. You can get very similar effects with them, but it's a different chemical entirely. So let's zoom in here. Okay, now I'm starting to want to move a little bit faster to kind of get a little bit closer to finish. Because, like, we could be I could finish this painting in 5 minutes, or I could keep on going and finish it. I could finish it 3 hours from now. It always just is like, well, how much do I want to, like, how much time do I want to put in here? Okay, so I think right now what I'm going to do, let's get some warm blue on here. And some cool blue. This color is going to be great for this kind of medium, these mountains and things in here. So, in fact, let's zoom in. I'm not sure how well that's coming across on camera, but it looks great in person. I could be tempted to add a little bit of white in there to brighten it up. Let's just do a little bit of a little much. I'm also just going to take a bit of this. I'm going to be selective. I'll come back to that. Mostly she's putting this in the center. Like, I think this is a genius idea of hers to use this color where she's using it. Just makes these hills just come alive. So remember I said that there's a reason why I painted that there, this white here. There's the reason we're painting over top of it, but it's still there. Okay. So now there was a lot of cool blue in there. I'm just going to take mostly warm blue now. Just a big gob of it on my brush. And I'll just zoom back out so you see. So I'm taking this warm blue now you can't really see it too clearly, especially on camera, I don't think. But that's kind of the point. It's not about making this like a really bright warm blue. It's just helping to separate our foreground, or our background and middle ground. And then I'm just going to blend it out a bit here. I'm going to take a bit of it. I'm going to put some brown into this warm blue. Oops, there's too much white in there. Okay, warm blue, just kind of putting this in here. Okay. So I'm getting closer and closer. I think what I'll do is I'll glaze a little bit of this with some yellow, warm yellow. I think that would really help those. And here, warm yellow, warm yellow. Even a little bit of warm yellow in some places back there. Here. Okay. What's going on over here? That's like a cool green or something. Okay, so I think now what she's doing is going into some much thinner layers of paint. So as we get close to being done, So, yeah, we'll do that, and then of course the posts on here. What should we do? How about let's put a little bit of purple glaze into the top. So to do that, let's get a clean brush. So I've got my cool magenta red, and let's take some warm blue. We mix these together, especially the more blue we have. There we go. We're getting very, whoops, that's a good thing this is there. I got some water dripping from the heavens above. So, wow, you see all that? That's how hot this studio is. My goodness. Oh, it did get paint right on the face of this paint. Where did I see that big drop of water? Okay. Got it just in time. So, oh yeah, I was making a purple. I got a bit of white in there I'm not super happy with, but okay. So now I'm going to glaze with this. Let's just get some of that paint off. Keep that. Okay. So I just put some glazing fluid down, right? This is going to dry clear as it is right here. Now I'm just going to take a bit of this purple, get it on my brush, and blend it in. And wipe some of that off. And then I think that's pretty transparent, so let's add a little bit more. Got a little bit intense, a little thick. So you can use your mop brush to blend it out. zoom in. So Paul says, I was wrong the whole time. I use watercolor too often. Thanks. I wouldn't say you were wrong. I just say, like, I'm just talking about, this is the way that I paint. And the way that this, system that I talk about, that I think works pretty well. There's nothing inherently wrong with using, like, you can do anything when it comes to painting. So sometimes I get on my high horse, but having said all that, you should, you use the system that works for you, that is getting you what you want out of it, and if it works, then it works. Right? There's nothing wrong if it's not broken. Don't fix it. So we can really start to kind of get more and more precise here. I think I'll just sort of do a little bit more of this. But I think we're on the right track here with this magenta and like this purple going into the sky. It's definitely, maybe I put a little bit too much warm blue underneath there. We could add a little bit of gray and white in here to... I kind of like this pretty intense purpley sky. Okay, let's just take a look. So my goal is to be done here in about another 15 minutes or so. let's if I just zoom out, let's zoom back out here. So we're getting closer to that color in the sky. How much more do I want to do there is the question. Mine does look a little bit cartoony up there. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to move back down to the bottom of the canvas here, put some warm yellow glaze down there. And we'll see. Maybe I can put some of that. I will put a little bit of warm yellow glaze up there, so it's just a question of how much. Okay. So here's my glazing fluid, matte glazing fluid, and some yellow. Right, that's almost a little much. So if you got a little too much, just wipe a bit off and just sort of get more glazing fluid on there. There we go. And then like super subtle. This is the kind of thing that barely registers, but it's making a difference. If it's almost a bit too yellowy, maybe it needs to be a bit more greenish. So I'm going to take like literally a little bit of blue. I think that's what I need. Yeah. There we go. This kind of grassy. Where did that? Still needs to be a bit more blue. It's starting to look too much like urine or something. Maybe it's not so yellow. It just maybe it just needs more warm blue on there. Before I go too far, let me just see if any of this will work up here. So this is just this same color as I apply it over top. So this is my warm yellow glazing fluid with a little bit of blue in there. And as I'm applying it over top of this, it started kind of giving it just a little bit of a grayish hue. Okay, I have to be a little bit careful about going too overboard here. So I want to be pretty subtle with some of this stuff that I'm doing. So I could be doing this as a gray glaze, but I always just, I'd like to use color more than value. Okay. That I need a bit more white back in here. Okay. Let's go over this magenta we had here, just calm it down just a bit. Okay. I think that's, you know, I could do more work up in there. I'm starting to get really, I'm pretty happy with my version of the painting. And at some point I just have to be like, okay, let's just put that one to the side because it's not helping. The only things that I'm thinking about right here is this horizon line. And it's not quite straight. That doesn't bother me because it's kind of going up and down. I think that's fine. Yeah. So, actually, let's just get a bit more yellow. some warm yellow down here. It's kind of an orangey patch there. So I'm going to put it's too intense. Let's get some more reddish brown here. Ooh, I like this. Okay, so this is just my warm red and warm yellow, but it gives it this nice little glow of you know, the it's like dead grass underneath everything, but it just gives it a bit of like a life. I like. Nice. And that, I mean, this is not something I'm just inventing. This is right out of her own painting, but it just comes with just looking at hers just a little bit more carefully. Just putting little bits of it in the hills. I'm not even sure if any of this is showing up on camera, but I like how it looks on my side, so. Okay, so I think we just need to put some little dark fence posts in this painting. So let's mix up our final color for today, which is some cold blue. Where should we do this? Cold blue, cold red. We'll put this right in the middle. Okay, that's about as close to a black as you're going to get without using black, and I don't think we need it or really would want it anyway. So mix that up. Get my small or smallish brush. Let's zoom back in. I think we're going to start right there. Kind of coming up. You know what this? Oh, there's, okay, I see. does have a little bit of very subtle. She didn't paint. Oh, I guess there are some more. I was gonna say she didn't do the line or the wire in between all of these. And then it sort of disappears down here. So maybe the wire fell off the fence. I'm not sure. Okay. Let's just take a look. There's some small deviations in the colors, probably noticeably up here. I could spend a little more time putting purple glaze into the clouds up there, and I'd get definitely much closer. But I don't mind it like it is right now. I kind of like the way that everything looks, so yeah, especially if I'm just looking at mine on its own. When I look at it on its own, I'm really, really happy with it. As I look at the screen, I'm like, it's I look at mine again, looks really good. Look at the screen, right? Look here, there, look here, oh, it looks good. Oh, right. So that's going to happen, right? Especially because, you know, I have two monitors. I got a preview monitor showing what you're all seeing right now, and then I've got my computer, and the colors of the original are different on the different monitors, right? So, and who knows, like the image that I pulled off the web, did the photographer match the colors exactly to the original, or were they off? The only way to know for sure is if we took our paintings, we walked into the National Gallery of Canada and held it side by side, and it might look totally different. Or we'd be like, bang on, right? And if we had 10 of you guys, we all showed up at the same time. We did, what do they call those? It's been a while since we've seen those. Where a bunch of people show up on the web because they've been using its same app or whatever. Or they show up in, not a meetup, but a flash mob. You know, if we flash mobbed the National Gallery with our paintings, some of you are in the Ottawa area, right? You could go there, bring your painting, and hold it side by side, and you could see how close you were to the original. And you might say, that's so weird, because it looked exactly, I matched the colors exactly to the image that Michael had in the Dropbox, but it's different than what's in person, right? So I'm really happy with this. I like that. I think that's good. I'm going to show you a few more pictures of hers just before we go, because there was I didn't show them earlier, and there was a few others that I really loved that that I might still do at one point here. So this is I like that. And again, I love brighter colors. I see more of the pinks, more of the deeper blues than I think that I see in the digital image that we've been working from. That is weird. What's this? It's like something got scraped off. 1 second. How can I do a quick little... thing there? I think that's good. Let's look at them side by side one last time. I could have also put a little more yellow in here. I don't know. I like it. I'm done. I'm calling this one a day. Okay. Maybe just, as I said, I just want to show a few more images of her work here. So you could see, I'm trying to remember what period of time. I think around the mid to late 1930s, she gets involved in this spiritual group called IM, which still exists today. Let me see. Was there anything mentioned about it in her personal biography? Oh yeah, here. Okay, so she gets involved in this group IM, and part of this group emphasizes that darker colors represent kind of create negative behaviors in people, and so her palette starts to brighten up considerably. Remember, this painting that we did today, 1925, you can really see the influences J.W. Maurice and like post-impressionism, Canadian post-impressionism. And then after she becomes involved in this religious organization, her palette brightens up considerably. And you could see, like there's a bunch of these paintings that I thought were really beautiful. They remind me a lot of Renoir. Where's a few more of them? You can see that I have such a hard time choosing which paintings to paint. Now I don't think this is her painting. That's a painting of her, I think. Oh, there's a few that. Oh, here's one. I loved this. If I was to do another painting of hers, I'd probably do this one. I love that one. And there's another one of two girls together here. I loved this one too. These are, I think, great paintings of hers. So, I mean, yeah, there's plenty of stuff to keep you occupied of hers, just like there is of any of the artists that we've looked at. These are all great paintings of hers. Okay. So I think I'm going to call it a day there, folks. Thank you so much for painting along with me. This has been another fun painting to do. Please like and subscribe to the channel and upload your version of today's painting or any other painting you're working on to the Facebook group. In 10 days, 8 days, or whatever, we're going to have a feedback episode where I'm going to look at your paintings, give you some suggestions on how you might be able to improve it, or just a good old-fashioned pat on the back, because most of you are doing an exceptional job painting to painting to painting. And remember, you're the hardest critic of your own artwork, so sometimes you just have to lay off a little bit, and you got to see the improvement over whatever possible defect or that you might see in the painting, because that's all, when we're making the painting, sometimes all we can see is the problems in it. Like I could obsess over well, the color in the sky isn't great. I showed this to my wife, and she was like, wow, that's amazing. I can't believe you painted that. Yeah, but aren't you bummed out that the color in this... She's like, I don't know, what's wrong with the color in the sky? It looks great to me. And I'm sure that's probably what's happening for most of you. That if you show these to your partner, your children, your parents, or whatever, they're just blown away that you're making a painting at all. And the fact that it looks like a landscape and it looks, for all intents and purposes, like a masterpiece. The fact that some little problems are there. Every painting's got problems, including the Mona Lisa's got problems. I can't think of a single perfect painting out there, right? So if the masters weren't perfect, you shouldn't expect perfection out of yourself either, right? Every painting plants the seeds of the next painting that comes, right? And that frustration you have, convert it into eagerness to make another painting going forward, right? There's 109 other paintings that we've done here, so there should be something else that I've done that would appeal to you. And also, you might just not be picking paintings that suit your actual temperament and abilities and your natural talent, right? Maybe painting representational paintings of landscapes or flowers and animals, you might be better suited doing abstract compositions, of which we have a number coming up in September, so stay tuned for that. Yeah, so anyway, lots of stuff yeah, I'm pretty hungry. Okay, so we'll see you guys in a few next weekend. Next week we have Doris. Doris McCarthy. I always think of Doris Markowsky because that was my grandmother's name, Doris Markowsky. We're painting Doris McCarthy painting on Tuesday, and then Anna Molka Ahmed painting on Thursday. Both of them are going to be fantastic episodes. I bet you've never heard of any of those artists. Doris McCarthy is arguably one of the greatest Canadian artists of all time. And I've got a few of her books here. If you want to run out to your library and get some of these books, she wrote her autobiography. I'm just going to show really quickly. This book, My Life, is the most recent version, and it is sort of a compilation of two previous. This is kind of her youth, and this is as she was getting older. She lived to 100 years old and was painting pretty much up until the day she died at 100. So if there's any of you thinking, oh, I'm too old to get into this game, tune in next week for Doris McCarthy. I think one of the greatest of all time. And Anna Molka Ahmed is also a fantastic artist. We're painting her next Thursday to celebrate Pakistan's independence, and she is the most important artist in Pakistan modern history, man or woman. There's some people who would say there's a few different men who were better artists than hers. I would debate that, but certainly they can't argue her importance would supersede all of the other male artists in Pakistan, right? You probably wouldn't think that off the top of your head, that Pakistan, the greatest, most important artist from Pakistan would be a woman, right? But she is, and you're going to be pleasantly surprised. Some of you have been wanting to use palette knives for a while. We're going to use only a palette knife to paint a portrait and a landscape next Thursday. Palette knife mania next Thursday. Okay, everyone, thanks so much for joining me. We'll see you guys in a couple of days. Enjoy your weekend until I see you again. And yeah, thanks again for painting with me. If you want to leave a donation, there's a PayPal link down below, or you can send me an email, e-transfer, through my website or the Facebook group. We'll see you guys soon. Good night, everybody.